This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. As always, my name is Alex Perny, and today we are very pleased to welcome on Kevin Davis. Kevin has a very interesting background, and I'll let him explain a little bit of that further. But a topic that we have broached on this podcast several times in kind of different avenues has been financial literacy and education. And that's kind of one of the core tenets of this. Granted, we like to educate people on different alternative investments, but it falls under the umbrella of education and trying to get people to understand more about what is out there. But part of that is understanding how people consume information. And one of the big problems with finance is that it's a hard topic. It's like healthcare. It's something everyone knows that they need to understand more. But when it comes to actually where the rubber meets the road, sometimes people have a lot of problems with it. And they may think, oh, well, X, Y, or Z is happening. I'm okay. I'm fine. But I'll take it from someone that's been doing this for a long time. And, my guest today, Kevin, that's been doing it for much longer than me. There's always more stuff to learn. And, you're never going to be the smartest person in the room when it comes to finance. You shouldn't always necessarily strive to be, but having a good baseline understanding and being able to be functionally independent in your decision making and understand what's going on is very important. But again, the problems come in, and how do you do that? You can go and sit down and read through Forbes till your eyes want to pop out of your head. You can have gotten degrees in economics and finance. But a lot of these things have a kind of a steep barrier to entry. One, in understanding it, and two, might be economic as well. So bringing this kind of stuff to the masses and helping to democratize education and finance is something I'm very passionate about. Throughout my career in finance, it's something that's been a kind of a core focus of what I've done, whether it be through webinars, direct outreach, speaking at different organizations, trade shows, and also doing this podcast. So again, Kevin, thank you very much for being on with us today. I'm really excited to kind of get into your take on this and kind of how, the gamification of financial education and literacy is something that you're trying to promote. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about yourself so people understand kind of who you are and where you've come from, and we'll kind of jump into the topic at hand.
Awesome. Thank you again, Alex. I appreciate you for having me on the show. I would say that as far as my background is concerned and what led me to the journey, what really led me on this path was the fact that I used to be in the music business. And I was the first artist, rapper signed to Warner Brothers Records, like on their imprint, right? So Benny Medina, who managed J-Lo and all these other good people that created the Fresh Prince show, signed me to Warner Brothers. And I did very, very well. I made, just for the sake of color, I made almost $2 million in like a few years and lost it all. Didn't understand money. Really wasn't pulled aside and said, you know what? You should buy some real estate. You should invest in some stock. And upon watching the movie Trading Places, I was excited and looked at it like, wow, this has got to be amazing. What is this? And I didn't know it was commodities at the time. I didn't know anything. So that pointed me in the direction of Wall Street. I was sitting in front of my grandmother's home in Kew Gardens, Queens, and reading the newspaper, looking for employment after the career was over. And a friend of mine, and I happened to be looking at wanted ads for being a stockbroker. And my friend was sitting on her stoop, who actually got me my first job when I was 17 years old, said, listen, I work at a firm. I'll take you in. I said, goody, let's go. So I didn't know I was going into the wolf's mouth. I went into the lion's den, which was Stratton Oakmont. And Stratton Oakmont was the Wolf of Wall Street. So was there for 2 years, learned how to sell amazingly, didn't learn anything about researching stock, didn't fulfill the quota of trying to get my, where I needed to be, and was really not too much help for anyone but ourselves as stockbrokers in that firm. So that company went out of business, but I wound up going to a research company that my world kind of opened up, and I'm sort of a nerd when it comes to numbers and didn't really know it. So I went from rapper to nerd and didn't even know it. So I used to be a computer, in college, I was a a student teacher in computer science. Hence, I'm probably why I'm in tech now. But anyway, and I really liked the numbers. I hated math in high school, loved it in college, go figure. But when I got to, learning research, I was like, this is amazing because how the world worked was right in front of me in form of data and numbers. And I was like, And then I learned to formulate that. And then I realized that a lot of people didn't really understand investments. And so that kind of led me to this journey, of gamification, because I realized people always looked at this thing like a hairy ball of yarn. Like, what is this thing? I can't figure it out. And because of that, I always felt like we got to figure this out. We got to solve this problem. We have to be able to democratize it. How do we make it easier for people to want to learn, number one, and number two, have the right path to go on?
Fantastic. No, it's definitely some some interesting insight. So you got the trading pork belly futures was kind of what your the first stab at. It's one of my favorite movies.
Yes, sir.
It's an amazing movie. I remember it was probably one of the first finance movies that I ever watched. I think I might have been a little young in my formative years to watch the original Wall Street movie, but Trading Places definitely holds a solid place in my heart. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah, it's definitely always interesting to hear people's backgrounds. It's one of the things I find most interesting. And another part that I bring into this, especially in the context of financial literacy and education, is that everyone starts somewhere. I mean, you started out as a musician. You wouldn't think musician turned stockbroker into financial tech and literacy is something that anyone would really pencil in as far as like a flow chart for a career. But it happens. Everyone starts somewhere. And the best thing anyone can do for themselves is take that first step. And it's the hardest one. Whether it's, starting a diet regimen, whether starting your financial literacy, you eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And you gotta take that first step. So thanks for kind of giving us a little bit of your background. Now from that, you have, you as yourself, I'm assuming you probably had a lot of steep learning curves when it came to, getting into finance, right? Coming out of being a musician and, from my knowledge of the firm you mentioned, you probably would have come in the mid to late 80s of being on a stock trading floor, doing that. So that probably kind of gave you a lot of primers of saying, okay, look, I understand that there's can be a steep learning curve for people. So maybe go into a little bit of kind of some things that you identified early on that might have drawn a correlation from where you came from and the issues that you had to what you saw in the broader market of helping people get educated in finance.
So first and foremost, I got a 91.2 on my Series 7. They say I studied too hard. And so, I realized that it was so foreign to my friends that when I went out to gatherings and people would say, because they knew me in my other life, they'd come up to me and say, well, you're a stockbroker. Okay, right? They would challenge that. But then they would ask me the question, so what would you do with $10,000? And I understood it wasn't really a healthy question. It was just a question of just trying to test my mettle, I guess. But I also knew that there was a really deep ignorance there. And because of that ignorance, that is what led me to where I'm at now. But before, and it wasn't a narrow path. It wasn't a straight path. It wasn't linear. I mean, I owned a mortgage company and two insurance companies along the way. And what really answers the question is, it wasn't until 2016 that I really understood that I wasn't enriching myself by doing what I learned. Like, I didn't think I could do it for myself. I was in a position mentally of doing it for other people. And so once I started to dip my foot into the water, I realized, wow, this is amazing. Okay. So then I started freeing up capital. So it became about, okay, whatever dollar that I spend, I have to invest. That's the only way I'm going to get it back. And if I can get a meager 10%, I can get that money back in 7 years based on compound interest. And I started doing that. My friends kind of roped me into, you should do contests. You should do training. You should start coaching. And I was retired in 2019. I retired. And I was like, I don't think so. But then when COVID hit, COVID brought to me the intention that, you know what? Okay, what am I going to do? I'm doing nothing. Let me put something together. So I started a group that ballooned from 29 to 2,500 people overnight, really. And then it went up to like, I think it's around 6,500 now. They had to kind of twist my arm to get on TikTok. And I got about almost 12,000 people there now following me. But I realized because the information's so sticky, people don't really understand it. And for someone to break it down, simplify it, baby food it, so a 7-year-old understands it, was not common. And then having the both sides of the I started at a very small firm, and then I went to a firm that was more about research, but I saw both sides, the dark side and the lighter side, so to speak. So I was able to inform people based on what I was seeing, based on the dynamics of, volume, just the whole understanding of the machine. And that's the deal there. But for the most part, this made me want to democratize it because I really understood that they would never get this education from anybody, not even people who are on Wall Street for a very long period of time. They don't share it. They don't share the information.
Yeah, sure. And it's definitely a little bit of a walled garden scenario. And there's kind of 2 points I like to make sure I illustrate for people is that, COVID for, the vast majority of people was a very big eye opener. And it really kind of shook the foundation like a big earthquake. And if you hadn't have built it, there's plenty of people that were in very dire straits. Plenty of friends of mine, even my household, my wife, lost her job, my income drastically reduced, but, having a good plan in place, made it, it was very unpleasant. There were things that we had to, change, do and everything like that. But, we never, more or less went without. And, it definitely wasn't a pleasant time. But, having those kind of, checks in place and making sure that you have the ability to weather a storm like that, again, I think was helpful for a lot of people and, really kind of brings that focus back to making sure you understand financial planning, your literacy to be able to weather those kind of storms. Maybe a bad pun living in Florida like both of us do right now, but it
Right.
definitely kind of does that. And to the other point of this is that you're exactly right, is that there's, a walled garden of this kind of stuff where it gets broken down. You typically have to engage someone like a financial advisor who will, hopefully have those kind of tools and knowledge to be able to help you make decisions, but you might not necessarily, typically aren't going to be sitting down for every decision they make, understanding, hey, this decision was made, here's why it was made, here's the future goal that we're trying to achieve with this. You turn some of that over, and there's value to that. Not saying people should educate themselves so they don't need a financial advisor. I wholeheartedly believe that is a good profession that, hopefully people get into for the right reasons and are trying to act in a good and best interest of their clients. But, there is a place for that, but you need to understand what's going on. When people, turn their back on what's going on and just assume everything is running correctly, then that's where issues happen. You need to understand enough to be able to be that check and balance against what is going on in your financial life, whether that's a financial advisor, whether that's a robo advisor, whether that's your spouse or someone else that's taking care of it. Understanding enough to say, hey, look, okay, this looks okay, or this looks in line with what I'm trying to do. So again, I think this is all great. So you've come from the the kind of the analytical side. You're seeing this, you kind of want to break it down for people to bring them into that, and that's a pretty arduous task.
Yes.
I understand a lot of my industry, right? The alternative side of things, tax qualified plans, benefit plans, IRAs. I understand that stuff in painful detail. But that is just one, in the broad scheme of finance, one small segment. If you put me on a stock floor, I'd be like, well, I think Microsoft had a quarterly earnings report. Was it good? I don't know. But if you say, hey, look, this guy is developing a, commercial real estate development. There's 100 doors, $20 million cap raise. Here's what we're looking at. I can dig through that like, like like someone on Christmas and be like, all right, cool. This is awesome. X, Y, and Z. But again, I don't know what I don't know in other industries. So how do you kind of take that vast amount of knowledge, and kind of, start breaking it down to bring people in?
Very good question. And that was such a great, like the way you broached that was awesome because it's so true. Number one, inspect what you expect. So the financial advisor piece, they are necessary. A good friend of mine said to me, listen, I have $300,000. I want you to help me with it. I said, no. He said, why? I said, you should get a financial advisor. If you want me to teach you what I know, take maybe 3% of it and I'll teach you what I know. Okay. Because that's your safe money. That is the make sure I have a retirement money when it's time to retire, right? If you want to play games, then ask yourself the question, what is your track record now? Oh, you don't have a track record. Do you understand what you're doing? No, you don't understand. So why would you put someone who's not professionally qualified in front of the percentages you want to make on your money? Don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. So, he absolutely loved that conversation because he's up significantly now in both aspects and he's happy he's in that space. What I also realized is that let's start where they live. Let's start the conversation with what they understand. They understand 401ks. They understand that. They understand they've heard of IRAs, not so much Roth, but they have heard of how they work. So let's break that down and let's get into not just the matching aspect of it, but the fees aspect, the tax aspect of it all, and the fact that a very small percentage of America is maxing out their 401ks. And so you really don't have a choice. If you don't understand stocks, you forget about how much they're taking out in taxes and fees. I'd rather have something versus nothing, right? So a lot of people say, well, I don't want to be charged $1 million in fees over 30 years because I go, well, let me ask you a question. If you end up with $2 million, they charged you $1 million and you end up with $2 million after your taxes, and you haven't been able to be consistent in your own regard, where's the fault here? So you have to look at it from both sides, not the side that you want. And what I've found is that people use greed to supersede research, so they don't really look. So getting back to the breaking it down piece, I try to simplify it by coloring it 3 or 4 different ways to explain one thing, right? And it depends on who I'm talking to. So I speak to the level of my crowd, right? Because I understand that we have a lot of vocations. I'm looking at a lot of people with different titles, and they don't really understand what I do. So like when it comes to quarterly reports, as you mentioned, and I make sure that if you're going to buy something, does it make sense for you to understand what it is? And then you have to understand the learning curve. So what does that mean? If you listen to an earnings report as a civilian, I call them civilians, and you've never listened to an earnings report, a call, you'll be like, what am I listening to? Right? But I'm sure when they kicked Michael Jordan off his team in high school, they was like, what am I looking at? Now look at Michael Jordan. So think about the practice it takes. Think about all the things you need to do to get up to speed. So, but if you listen to 10 earnings reports, you still won't be a genius, but you'll recognize similarities. And in that, they have this thing called Google, ChatGPT, all of these different things that helps you understand it. And then what I do is I kind of like try to simplify it to something that they're related to, something that they understand. And they go, oh my God, okay, great. No, I totally get it, because people are so busy doing the things they're doing in life. They feel kind of like overwhelmed when it comes to trying to learn something new, but they get more overwhelmed at the end stages or mid stages when they realize that the money that they have to retirement is not going to be enough. So they get a little pressed, if that makes any sense. So I do my best to try to break it down for them.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Is that, people, when they start out looking at this, there's a lot of information out there, and that's, a good thing, by virtue of what the SEC and the regulations put out there. There's, if you're going to play in the traditional securities world, there's a lot of information, but it is, you'll get analysis paralysis very quickly. Again, on an earnings call, again, I can understand some of it, but been in finance for almost 14 years at a very specific level, and I still get confused on them.
Yes.
I don't, and again, it's not necessarily my it's not my area of expertise. I'm the first one to say that. I deal on the alternative side of things, so again, not my area of expertise, but again, I know enough. But it's, for someone coming in green to it, very difficult. So let's start digging into a little bit of kind of, the application of what you're doing. And I say that in 2 forms. One, the actual aspect of what you're doing, and 2, the product that you've actually put out there for kind of, again, to the point of gamifying this, because that's one thing I really enjoyed, and part of my undergrad was doing the stock market game, which has been out for it was even in paper format back, in earlier years, but it's been around for a long time. I really enjoyed that. It was, a competitive gamification. There's a reason people play fantasy football. It's fun and interesting, and people that otherwise wouldn't, know who the quarterback for the Jets is now know that it's Aaron Rodgers. I'm hoping you're not probably playing him, but people understand. You know, just by virtue of the osmotic effect of being in there and saying, "Oh, well, this is happening." I mean, look, okay, cool. Well, here's that. Okay, I can understand that. Let's play him and see what happens. That gamification I think plays very well to the psychology of humans in general. All of us, even if you say you're not, are a little bit competitive. All of us enjoy something that, helps us to interact with other people. That's why social media is so big. So again, the gamification, even if you just like a puzzle, you enjoy some of that stuff. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the development of that and kind of some of the things that you built in and, kind of where it started and where it is now of things that worked, didn't work, and kind of your progression with that.
Sure. Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. So, number one, the application came about because I was holding contests. Did my 21st contest. What are those contests? Investopedia had a stock simulator on their site. So we would use that to hold contests. And then I was using GroupMe, the app, in order to keep everybody together and give them the information in the game and keep everybody competitive. And what I realized was that people were not only wildly competitive, but super excited to learn something that they always thought was out of their reach. And so every morning, Investopedia would update their leaderboard at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. So people would get up early as we get up to look at the market at 4 a.m. And they were telling me about this. And I said, okay, that's one thing. And so the site changed their simulator. They took it from not so good to worse. Let's put it that way. And my buddies was like, Kevin, why don't you just do your own? You can finance it. I didn't know if I wanted to put those type of funds into anything at that point because I was retired. But I said, okay, let's do it. So my wife, who has a degree in marketing, goes, you know what? I found a company out of India. They've done work for Google. They've done work for UPS. Let's contact them and see if it makes sense. And she gave me like 3 choices. And so I got on the telephone and, as most salesmen do, they promise you the stars. We'll get it done in 6 months. But we saw the work that they did. So I said, okay, I didn't think it was going to be 6 months, but I was pretty confident that they would be able to deliver the deliverables. So long story short, it took 3 years to be exact. And so what makes the app different from all the simulators, because there's a lot of simulators on the market, is that, number one, we moderate the games that we host. So you can play without moderation, of course, but we also made it so people can play in real time and they can play with a 15-minute delay. So the fun part comes with the 15-minute delay. I'm sure we all saw the Wall Street movies where they were trying to get an eighth of a second difference to benefit from a trade. But being able to see the stock market 15 minutes in advance is like, listen, you could sit there and you can profit all day. So, for instance, if Apple was trading at $227 in the market on the app, if it was trading at 210, you could buy it at 210 and exploit the difference. And so we made it a game. We didn't want people to be good at picking stocks. We wanted people to be good at finding them and understanding why stocks went up and why stocks went down and start digging into it. So hence became about edutainment. So I'm currently doing a contest right now, and these guys are just going crazy. Just the leaderboard, because what we did was this. Let's go over some of the features that make it make sense. So each game has a group chat. So everyone can communicate inside the group chat. Each game has the portfolio pages, and they're live. They're moving live. We update the 15-minute delay games at 12 noon and at market close. Why? Because we like the anticipation to build, and it works for the game. We just added what we call the head-to-head feature. So if you had a team and I had a team, people can join those teams and play head-to-head, and that creates a lot more competition because I have the Bulls against the Bears, and right now the Bears are crushing the Bulls right now. So we made sure we also created a space for education. So during the game, I'll put out a a message. Listen, I'm doing a masterclass on Wednesday at 7:30. Anyone would like to attend, they can show up. And then what I do is I make sure I cover the framework of the market in a basic sense. So I always think we should always do the market with six senses. So I'll think about fundamentals, technicals, macro, micro, institutional money flow, and geopolitics. And so looking at from that standpoint and kind of just dig deeper into each of those sections, and I give them a minor, major education there, and they love the experience. It's an awesome experience from what they tell me, right? And so, and they're very engaged. Most of them show up. They're very engaged. So that's basically the actual app itself. And what we're planning to do with it is broaden it out where we can hold contests. For instance, my friends are always saying you should really educate the kids. And I go, well, you need to educate the parents first because they'll reinforce the lesson. So how about we do contests where we have the parents and the children both playing together against other parents and children and put them in teams against parents against the children. That would be awesome. So, and get sponsors and do all those things. So that's what we're about to start doing right now, working with a couple of organizations and get some sponsors and have some fun that way. But it's an awesome project.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a few good points that I really kind of like to drive home. And I've actually had someone specifically on financial education forward facing from parents to children, because that's a huge issue. A lot of people, come out in the world and, again, I love my parents, they're great. But, the basics of financial education I got from them was, save money, have a savings account, don't spend less than you make. But no real metrics on saying, okay, well, here's how much maybe you should be saving of this. Here's a retirement account. My grandfather, probably the most financial education I got, which was actually very helpful, was sitting down with him at his car dealership and we'd read through the stock market. And he was always been very involved in the stock market, done very well. But just reading through the actual paper and him explaining, okay, here's, what used to be like 5-6 pages of, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ and the Dow, and reading through everything and explaining it. So that's
awesome.
an awesome function. But something that I think is really important to understand here is, again, having a game where you can kind of play in, a sandbox, if you will, and say, okay, here, I bought this. Okay, great. It went up or it didn't. And that 15-minute lag feature, again, I think is really interesting to kind of help illustrate that. But the education aspect on those 6 principles of looking at the macroeconomic, the socio-political, the institutional money flow, and the other ones that you mentioned are very important, and things that, people don't often necessarily kind of grasp. One of the better things you can do is look at what large institutions are doing as well, because, again, to the adage of being the smartest person in the room, the smartest people in the room typically work for those, the BlackRocks and the Vanguards. Whether or not you agree with me, but hey, there's a reason that the market caps are $1 trillion, right? It's not from just throwing a dartboard at something. They are very, very good at what they do. And to the point where even the CIA looks at, large institutional money flow transactions to help identify terrorism in the world. Like that kind of stuff, like there are market factors out there. This stuff is very key to understanding, what's going on in the world and where you can, glean those dollars that people really don't realize. They look at the company, but look at where other people are investing. And I think that probably also is a part that I think would probably be beneficial to this gamification, is you can see what other people are doing too and how and why it worked. So in building that out, where do you kind of see that people, from doing this was it went live in what, 2019 is when it went live?
The app went live this year, but I've been doing the game since 2020.
Okay, so in the past, 4 years of doing something at least adjacent to this, and then also the app itself, where do you kind of see people finding the most success? When you engage with, students or players, when the people say, hey, here's what I kind of really, got the most value out of. Do you think it's them seeing what other people are doing? Is it the social aspect of it? Or is it kind of a mixture and amalgamation of all of it?
I think it's the camaraderie. I'm not doing it alone. I'm not the one that does it alone. I think it's the direction that they've never heard before. Trying to figure it out is not what they have to do anymore. they have a filter, and they have guardrails, and they have a way to travel down that highway. And they also know that you can't proceed until you read, so you got to get information. But they also know that wisdom is a road traveled by experience. So just because you read something doesn't mean it's going to apply, if that makes any sense.
No, it absolutely does. And one thing I'd be kind of curious to know, at least from the education standpoint of starting to run these games, and where it's come now, what do you think is probably something that people are least receptive to that maybe wasn't, I'm assuming you went in, everyone goes into something with some type of preconceived notion, right? Of thinking, hey, this will probably work the best. What are some things that you've seen that maybe didn't work out as well, and things that you maybe were a little bit surprised about that say, hey, people really gravitated towards this that I was surprised about? And then helping develop this and grow this kind of this education.
Hmm. The Well, I can only tell you the mindset that people come into the market with automatically is it's really a gambler's mindset. They think it's gambling. They don't really understand that it's not. It's educated guess, maybe, but it's based on data. A lot of people like um, it's almost like I like to compare it to penny stocks and then Bitcoin. You can be a Bitcoin enthusiast, but you can't tell me why it went up that day and why it went down that day because it's based on volume, right? More buyers than sellers, more sellers than buyers. With stocks, it's different. They cross over and they realize, wow, if you do it right, there are data points that measurements, right? I call it measurements. Measurements that if you apply and you understand how they work, and you have a big data set that you look through. And like I always tell people, you have to data mine, meaning take all of the data and line it up, and don't just do it for the period that you're looking at. Look at a very big period. You'll be able to catch some simulations and some familiarity there, and you'll be able to, okay, so history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so what I find is that people get really into it. Like, you should see how I have people who are with me for 4 years and counting. They started, if it was like the equivalent of, I have an 8-month-old daughter. It's the equivalent of hearing a baby babble, blah, 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 right? To now they're speaking in tongues. Like, they know everything they need to know on a basic level. And it's great communicating with them because they understand everything I'm saying to them now. And so I think people are pleasantly surprised that they can learn something new. And that is the takeaway.
No, that's definitely interesting. Kind of again into the psychological aspect of it, because that's such a core component of education is getting people in the right mindset to receive the information. You can leading the horse to water, right? You have to get them willing and engaged to, take the sponge out of the package, right? You try to wipe down your pots and pans with a sponge that's still in the package. It's not going to get you very far, right? You got to get it out. You got to be able to absorb and take in that information. Now, one thing, at least, I'm a fairly big gamer. I enjoy video games. I have my whole life. I enjoy board games, Dungeons and Dragons. I like playing games. But one thing I've at least know from myself and other people that, I've gamed with over the years is, a problem with maybe hyperfixation on something. Have you ever run into people when they come in and they play this that they get too focused on one thing? Like, let's say they love dealing in stocks, and they kind of forget that there's other places that, have value, whether that be commodities, mutual funds, ETFs, things like that. Have you seen people do that, or have you built in systems that kind of help to make sure people always stand, 10 feet back from the register and kind of see the whole thing going on? Because again, I know, it goes from personal experience, I'll get sucked down a side crest real quick and kind of lose the trees to the forest.
Yeah, what I do is I don't want people to be skewed in one direction. I want them to know about bonds. I want them to know about their retirement accounts. I want them to know about different assets. It's like people go, why aren't you into real estate? Well, I mean, it's not that I'm not into real estate. It's just that this is where I'm at the present, but I understand the taxes. And I love the fact that you can save a lot of money in profits and taxes. So I love it. If you work it the right way. But the reality behind it is that I always give them homework. So the way my systems work is that I know that they know nothing. I also know that if you inundate them and try to hold them accountable to something they're fearful of, they'll back away. So what I do is I give them day work, not homework, and I don't check it. So I'll say today is we're reading Lords of the Money. Lord of Money, whatever the case may be. And they'll look at the book and probably grab that book. Or today we're looking at the 11 sectors of the S&P 500. Google it and have fun finding. And then I'll tie it all together in our meetings. So what happens is this: my typical moderated contest is 2 weeks long. And so I'll have an orientation on a Saturday where we just go over the app and how to play, and I point them to all the tools they need to, watch the videos, whatever the case, in order to play. And I tell them some strategies. On Monday, we have a recap of what happened in that day just to tie them down to the game and make sure they know they got help. On Wednesday, we'll have a master class where I go over those points I mentioned earlier. And then every day during the week, they're getting homework, or day work, as I call it. So this way they can stay plugged in. Every day, I'm also encouraging them to read at least one financial article and listen to CNBC for at least 15 minutes. Get them into the habit of building wealth, get them into the habit of being connected to those things. And what happens is at the end of the period, they just feel like there's a thirst for knowledge, and they're looking more into, okay, financial structure. Do I have a trust? What do I have to do to get a trust? Do I have my insurances lined up? Because I owned an insurance company, and I don't sell these guys anything. I just educate them on what it is. So I give them the education so they can figure out that for their families. So it's really a financial walkthrough, so to speak. So by the time you're done, the only excuse you have is the ones you make.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point. And, kind of during the life cycle of this, how do you kind of factor in, because it's definitely a balancing act, again, of kind of managing the inputs to, hopefully get the outputs that you desire for your students, or, ideally what they desire for themselves. And, kind of, again, coming in and, education is kind of done in three parts in my mind, to oversimplify. You have the initial intake, for you, which is kind of figuring out the mindset, getting them to, broaden their scope and look at this, at a much more holistically, take that 10 steps back and look at it. The continuing education of saying, hey, like, let's do this homework, let's get this education to help you make that informed decision. But then kind of the final component of that would, I would imagine, be some type of like after action report, looking back on it, say like, hey, like, here's what happened and why did it happen the way it did? Do you have kind of a component of that where it's looking at it, going back and saying, hey, look, here's how everything played out. Here's how the game finished up. Here's why it happened.
So my favorite saying is the why is more important than the what. So we challenge that a lot. I also I'll use my resources and build tests. And, it's the type of test that the answers tell their psychology, right? Not so much A, B, C, and D. It's like, if you answered A, this is where you are, right? And so we do a lot of that. So a lot of my, I guess, I don't know if I consider myself a teacher, but really I coach people through certain things, is psychological, how we look at things. And then once I understand your psychology, then I can kind of plug in the gaps, because now how you understand things become very important. And then once you understand why it's important, then you go, oh, because if you just tell me what it is, that's okay. It's like I used to tell my wife, if someone hits me with their car, I really don't want to hear why. I'm only focusing on what. But when it really happens, if your end result is the thing that you want the most, you might be more focused on why and how you get there. So they go together, but why becomes first, because everything that I do, I have a 8-month daughter, 8-month-old daughter, well, about to be 9 months in Friday. And I have we get sleep sparingly around here. And we have a 6-year-old son who's, discovering heights, jumping off of things. It's great. So, and I bring that up to say that my purpose of what I'm doing is for them. So I don't show them just into the why they should understand stocks. I show them to their walking existence on this earth on why you're doing what you're doing. Because I tell people all the time, I'm like, okay, minutes is great, but moments are better. So if you understand, money can buy you moments. It doesn't buy you time, but you can definitely spend more moments if you have the finances to do so. But if you understand what it is, it's just a better tool. But if you don't stop building a better cage for yourself by the less you know, your world starts to close in on you. So once you get that financial breath of air, you understand it. So one of the things I tell people, and this is just what I do, I pay myself first. That's cliche because everybody says that. But what I do is if I got $5,000 in bills, or let's bring it down to layman's terms, if I got $500 in bills, I have to invest $500. I have to. I can't just pay you without paying myself. I can't, because I'll never get back the money I paid you. Right? It's almost like taking money out the ATM. You never put it back. Like, I don't know anyone ever puts that money back. So if I don't pay myself, I don't have an opportunity to go forward. So the why that's attached to that $500 paying myself is not about me to making money. They go, what do you mean? I go, number one, it's like the old commercials from back in the days, the Roach Hotel. Once it checks in, they never check out. So my money goes in one way. It does never come out. I focus on streams of income to hold my family down and to make sure that we don't have to worry about anything financially. But those accounts, it's like I tell people, I'm probably the brokest millionaire, because I don't touch the money. It's my sons, it's my daughters, and it's my wife. Because I tell people I have to have enough money for my wife not to mess with my son's money or my daughter's money. So the whole thing is, to bring it to a close, it's about knowing the why first, have a base for purpose. Then you can really be motivated to learn what is going on. And then once you know it works, then you're sold into the process, knowing what happens. Meaning, just one last thing is that if I know that the S&P 500, as an example, has made 10.6% over the last 90 years compounded interest, and I know that if I put my money into it on a consistent basis, I can turn, $100 every month in 47 years to $1.1 million. Well, why isn't that not a no-brainer? If I add, for every 100 that I add another 1.1 million in 47 years. So if you know that, then why aren't you teaching the children that when you get your summer jobs, this is what we're going to do? Yeah, you'll have money to buy your sneakers and clothes and phones, but you need to put X amount of dollars away and get them into a habit. And then it becomes, okay, now that habit is formed. When you show them accounts, they show them the accounts knowing that they can't touch it. It's just you're building up for your retirement, but you're teaching them money education. And so to wrap it, it becomes, they say the second generation loses the money, right? 80% of those generations, they lose the money. Not if you coach them and you leave controls on how you should do so. So that's just my thought process.
I find it interesting when I hear people that have, a different outlook on education than I do. And it's definitely interesting to look because my, again, thought that I kind of laid out is, a lot more linear than that. You kind of have the aspect of kind of driving down, taking a stop, maybe driving back a little bit to then in turn take a route to the end of it, which makes sense. Again, I really kind of see a lot of value in that, of figuring out the why, and that will kind of elucidate to the how of it all. The education along the road is great in figuring out, okay, hey, like, let's get the mindset right. Let's figure out the how along the way by, practical application of this. And then certainly, the game and the app certainly helps to play out to that. But then taking a really long look at the why, which again would drive those decisions. Because, again, the simple way to put it is that it's easy for someone to say, hey, I want, $2 million in retirement. Well, that's great. That's a number. It's, quote, easy enough to do that by just, saying, hey, here's the numbers, here's how you need to invest. But why do you want to do that? Oh, well, I want this. It's like, well, what about your kids? What about your wife, if you have them? What about your dog? It's like, what's the why behind it? And it's like, oh, well, maybe I don't need $2 million, or maybe I need twice that amount of money. That why is a really key component that, again, I, first one to admit right here, wouldn't necessarily have put as much stock, no pun intended, put as much stock into. But again, I think it's very important, especially to look at new things, especially with the openness to learn new ways of doing things. That's something that I always try to do is, not only learn new things, but learn new ways of learning them. And I think that's kind of what you're aiming to do with the gamification of all of this, which is, again, awesome. Again, big gamer, love that aspect of it. But again, I think to the point of helping people to understand this, in a different way is very important. Now to kind of, bring this in for a little bit of a landing, the actual, application, first off, what's it called?
Oh, yeah, that part. It's called it's called Investment Dojo. It's available in both the Apple and Google Play stores, and it's also Investment Dojo website, so investmentdojo.com.
Okay, cool. And what's kind of like the typical, again, you mentioned that there's like a time horizon for this stuff. So like when people were to look at something like this, like what kind of time commitments are people looking at as far as kind of like what is a typical game run from lock to lock?
So it's a 2-week game, and I always tell people, listen, don't lose your job playing a game. So if you could put 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, then that's good, a day. It always turns out to be more than that, by the way. You always seem like I have people, the numbers that you get, like if I looked at the game now, you'll see someone with like maybe $15 billion because of that 15-minute lag, right? So if they turn to the left, they'll see someone with $17 billion. And so you can't underestimate the human nature and just competitiveness. So, but to answer the question, we tell people to put the time that they can put in, but it's really about the lessons. And we do those in the evening.
Okay, great. And lastly, is there any kind of final closing thoughts that you'd like to leave people with? I always like to make sure I give my guests, a final kind of stab at the podium of saying, hey, look, like, we've talked about a lot here, whether it be mindset, education, how someone has kind of had a career path that's illustrated that really anyone can do anything in life. You just have to have the commitment and the willingness to do it. So what are some kind of final closing thoughts in the context of what we've been talking about that you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, I always tell people, listen, if you're blessed to live to 80, that's 29,200 days. If you take and do the math on how many days you have left, you have to play with your time clock, your time, and your scoreboard, right? And it's important that you measure. So you mentioned $2 million. Well, $2 million may not do it if you outlive it, if you understand that over 20 years, it's $8,000 a month. So you have to really understand measurement and, do it with a purpose so you keep your eye on the ball and life doesn't distract you, because COVID did that for us. It allowed us to remove distractions. We were able to sit down and think, wow, I'll picture that. So if you can do it that way, you can reach your goals. And that's really big because it's not about money. It's about the time you spend on earth. It's so short. So yes, money's an avenue, money's a resource, but that's it. We're not walking around counting the blades of grass, but we're happy to be able to walk on it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic place for us to end this off with. So again, Kevin, thank you very much for being with us today. The most valuable asset I always feel is our time, and we can't make any more of it. So thanks for taking something so valuable to spend with us. Again,
You're very
this has
welcome.
been the
Thank you.
Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. My name is Alex Perny. If you want to check out the Investment Dojo, again, it's on the Apple Store and iOS and website, correct?
Yes, sir.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much again. My name is Alex Perny. This has been the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.